All coincidences with real people are random. If they tell you that this is not the case, ignore them. Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America, was used to fighting all kinds of enemies: Nazis, terrorists, aliens, and even his own friends when the situation demanded it. But now he faced a new challenge: a dark, unknown evil that had infiltrated the heart of the city, far more terrifying than anything he had ever faced. In recent weeks, New York had become the site of strange and eerie events. People disappeared without a trace, strange shadows appeared on the streets, and at night, the city was filled with a faint growl and whisper, like voices coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Steve was receiving more and more reports of mysterious attacks. People were going insane, claiming to see monsters hunting them in dark alleys. Steve couldn't stand idly by. He began patrolling the streets, trying to find the source of the evil. One night during his patrols, he noticed a strange symbol on one of the buildings, looking like a sinister eye with 3 claws instead of a pupil. He didn't know what it meant, but his intuition told him it was somehow connected to what was happening in the city. Steve met an old friend, Bucky Barnes, who looked worse than usual. His eyes were tired, his movements twitchy and nervous. Bucky told him he had also encountered these strange symbols and shadows that seemed to watch him. He felt hunted and anxious, unable to sleep at night due to the horrifying visions. "This isn't just crime, Steve," Bucky said, looking at the dark sky. "It's something ancient. I can feel it in my bones. It feeds on our fears and despair." Steve knew Bucky wasn't someone who said things lightly. If he felt the danger, something was definitely wrong. Captain America decided he needed to find those who might know more. He turned to Dr. Strange, the mage who knew everything about the paranormal and mystical. When Strange saw the symbol, he frowned. He told Steve that it was the sign of an ancient demon that feeds on people's souls. But the scariest part was that this demon could infect minds and use them against the person themselves. That explained why people were losing their minds and seeing monsters. After meeting Strange, Steve began to notice that the shadows in the city were becoming even more aggressive. It felt like the darkness itself was alive and trying to swallow everything around. One night, patrolling the Brooklyn Bridge, he heard screams. A woman was running along the empty bridge, followed by a shadow that seemed utterly unreal, like living black smoke. Steve rushed to help her. He scattered the darkness with his shield, but when he looked at the woman, he saw that her eyes had gone empty, her face distorted with terror. She whispered, "It's coming for you," and suddenly started laughing until she collapsed dead. Every day, Steve felt the city becoming more and more alien. Buildings he knew from childhood felt unfamiliar. The streets looked different, like a nightmare. Evil was everywhere, and Steve knew it was something far more powerful than he could ever imagine. A few days later, he came face to face with the demon. It happened in the underground of an abandoned metro. Steve and Bucky followed a shadow that lured them into a trap. There, among old tunnels filled with the smell of rot and decay, they saw a creature that resembled living darkness with burning eyes. It taunted them, playing on their fears. Steve charged at it, but his shield passed through the darkness, causing no harm. The demon laughed, its voice echoing and filling the tunnels. "You can't defeat me, Steve," the demon whispered. "I am your fear. I am your weakness. I am everything you fear and run from." Steve began to lose strength, his mind flooded with visions: ruined cities, fallen comrades, himself covered in his friend's blood. The demon tried to break him from within, and Steve realized he was fighting not only an external threat, but also his own inner fears. Bucky tried to help, but the demon simply tossed him aside like a doll. Steve tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. He was completely paralyzed by the terror devouring him from within. It seemed like all his strength was being drained by this darkness. "We can stop it together," Bucky said weakly, reaching out his hand to Steve. "We've always made it." But the darkness was too strong. The demon ensnared Bucky and Steve in its clawed shadows, and each step into the darkness brought new nightmares. Steve watched as Bucky screamed in agony and vanished into the dark, dissolving into his own nightmares. Steve was left alone. He could feel the darkness seeping under his skin, devouring his thoughts and will. Every moment, his mind became more clouded. In despair, he tried to strike the demon one last time, but his strength had abandoned him. The demon, as if mocking, flung Steve aside, leaving him lying on the cold floor of the tunnel. Steve knew this was the end. He couldn't save the city or himself. His strength and will to live were gone, consumed by darkness that was far stronger than any foe he had ever faced. In the final moment before his consciousness was swallowed by the dark, Steve saw the demon's face, and it was his own. When they found him, Steve Rogers, the great Captain America, was dead. But his death was not simple. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, and his eyes were empty, as if the darkness had consumed his soul. No one knew what had happened, but it was clear even the strongest hero can fall to his fears.